For centuries, the Vatican's forbidden vaults, secret societies, and silent scholars have guarded truths that could rewrite history. From alchemists who sought the wisdom of lost worlds to cathedrals built as coded messages in stone, knowledge once hidden in darkness now begins to reawaken. Beneath the symbols, beneath the silence, lies a story of light, preserved through art, geometry, and memory itself. In this cinematic journey, we uncover the secrets the Church tried to bury: lost gospels, forgotten sciences, and the hidden language of creation. The truth was never destroyed, only disguised, waiting for those who dare to look deeper. So join us on this journey through time, mystery, and forbidden knowledge. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Like, share, and subscribe to Mysteries of Earth. Across the centuries, humanity has forgotten more than it remembers. Wars have erased empires, fires have consumed libraries, and yet some truths refuse to die. They survived in shadows, whispered in symbols carved into stone, embedded into the very layout of cities, and encoded within lodges hidden from prying eyes. These were not stories of rebellion or conquest, but of memory itself, guardians of knowledge too potent, too dangerous to be left exposed. Secret societies, cloaked in silence, became the invisible stewards of human history. They did not march through streets waving banners. Their victories were not measured in territories or gold. Instead, they preserved. They hid. They waited. The symbols they left behind were subtle, often overlooked by those who walked the streets above. A compass etched into the corner of a cathedral, a spiral embedded in the floor of a hidden chamber, a street designed to echo celestial alignments, all whispered of a deeper order, a map of understanding hidden in plain sight. The Church, centuries later, understood, not fear, uli perhaps, but enough to fear. Fear not of rebellion, not of swords or armies, but of knowledge itself. Knowledge, after all, can awaken minds, and awakened minds do not bow easily. The inquisitors hunted heretics, burned texts, and obliterated memories. But the keepers endured. They worked in silence, passing truths from one generation to the next, often under the guise of ritual, art, or architecture. Theirs was a subtle, patient rebellion, a quiet insistence that memory, once buried, could always be revived. In the lodges, candlelight-illuminated faces bent over manuscripts too complex or sacred to ever leave the safety of their walls. Scrolls spoke of mathematics older than kingdoms, cosmologies that predated written history, and alchemical formulas that hinted at transformations far beyond mere metal into gold. Outside, the world moved on, ignorant and obedient. But inside, time was different. Centuries did not erase the knowledge. They safeguarded it, folded it carefully into codes and symbols, hiding it even from those who sought to preserve it. Cities themselves became vaults. Streets aligned with solstices and equinoxes, fountains marked celestial events, and monuments encoded ratios and patterns that could only be read by the initiated. Those who understood these signs could navigate both space and knowledge, tracing paths through history invisible to the casual observer. In their quiet vigilance, these societies became architects of memory, shaping not just the way people moved through cities, but the very way they remembered the past. Some were whispered to have traveled far and wide, seeking lost texts in monasteries, deserts, and forgotten ruins. Others hid knowledge in plain sight, embedding it in symbols the world mistook for decoration, patterns the untrained eye would dismiss as mere coincidence. And always there was a promise, a vow that the light of understanding, no matter how dim, would endure. Because the keepers knew the truth. Memory is a flame. It can be buried. It can be hunted. But it can never truly be extinguished. Even today, centuries later, the echoes of their work remain. a hidden spiral on a cathedral floor, a carefully aligned street, a symbol carved into a forgotten stone. Each is a testament to the guardians who refuse to let knowledge die. And though the world above may have forgotten, those who follow the signs, the seekers, the curious, the unrelenting, will find the flame waiting, patiently, quietly, ready to ignite again. The keepers of forgotten truths were never celebrated, never written into history books. Their victories were invisible, yet enduring. They remind us that history is not only what survives the fire, but also what we choose to remember, and that some truths, no matter how deeply hidden, will always return. To the world, they were dreamers, madmen, fools chasing the impossible. Alchemists were ridiculed for trying to turn lead into gold, dismissed as seekers of riches and vanity. But that was never truly their pursuit. They were hunters of memory, explorers of a wisdom older than kingdoms, guardians of truths erased by time and fear. Their quest was not for material wealth. It was for understanding, for a glimpse into the foundations of creation itself, for a way to unlock what had been sealed long before any empire drew its first map. In candlelit chambers, alchemists worked in silence, surrounded by strange instruments, copper vessels, and flasks filled with liquids that shimmered with impossible colors. Their notebooks contained not just formulas, but diagrams, symbols, and cryptic instructions. Every experiment, every reaction, was a dialogue with the universe, a conversation with forces that most deemed mystical or impossible. It was not magic in the childish sense, but a methodical, patient study of transformation, of matter, of mind, of understanding itself. They gathered in secret, forming circles and lodges where knowledge could be shared without fear. Members passed information through coded manuscripts, through allegories woven into poems, through images that seemed decorative but carried precise meanings. To the untrained eye, a phoenix painted above a doorway might appear ornamental, but to the initiated, it was a signpost. Rebirth, transformation, memory preserved beyond the reach of fire and time. Alchemists studied history as carefully as chemistry. They traced symbols through ancient civilizations, connecting the writings of Babylon, Egypt, and Greece. Every civilization had left a residue of understanding, and the alchemists sought the common threads, the echoes of a truth that survived wars, plagues, and the rise and fall of empires. It was as if we were following a hidden river of knowledge that flowed beneath the surface of recorded history, a stream too powerful to erase entirely. They were mocked, persecuted, burned at the stake, not because their work was dangerous, but because it threatened the narratives of power. Knowledge, when it became too potent, was seen as rebellion. And yet, even in exile or secrecy, the alchemists endured. They encoded their wisdom into symbols that could be hidden in plain sight, in church frescoes, in cathedral floors, in the folds of a king's robe. They understood that the human world could never fully contain what the universe had to offer, so they disguised the keys to that understanding in forms that would survive the centuries. Some alchemists claimed to speak with the past, drawing on manuscripts older than their own nations, texts whose authors had been long forgotten. Others experimented with light, sound, and the properties of matter itself, hinting at discoveries centuries ahead of their time. Their work blurred the line between science and spirituality, revealing a vision of reality that was both precise and infinite. The lead they touched was never just metal, it was a metaphor, a vessel for transformation, a symbol of what could be changed in the world and in the self. And yet their greatest achievement was invisible. It was memory preserved. In their laboratories, in their journals, in the carefully hidden symbols throughout cities, they created a network that refused to let humanity forget. Their knowledge was a seed buried beneath centuries of misunderstanding and fear, a light waiting for those willing to see beyond the ordinary, to ask the right questions, and to follow the thread through the labyrinth of time. The alchemists remind us that curiosity is more than a pursuit. It is survival. That the past is not only what is recorded, but also what is remembered. and that the search for understanding is never truly about what we can hold in our hands, but what we can carry in our minds and what we dare to uncover. For those who pay attention, who see the symbols, who read between the lines, the ancient way is still here, waiting quietly to reveal its secrets once more. Beneath the streets of Rome, hidden behind unremarkable doors and stone hallways, lies a place the world only glimpses in whispers, the Vatican's secret archives. To call it a library is to diminish its power. It is a fortress of memory, a repository of truths too potent, too dangerous, or too inconvenient for the world above. 50 miles of shelves stretch underground, flickering with the dim light of lamps, casting shadows that dance across manuscripts in languages long forgotten. Each volume hums with the weight of knowledge, as if the air itself remembers what these texts contain. The entrance is deceptively ordinary. A steel door, a badge scanner, and a stone corridor. Yet past that threshold lies an entire universe. Scrolls bound in blackened leather, codices etched with symbols no scholar alive can fully decipher, and letters that, when held, seem almost alive, resonating with the intent of their long-dead authors. Some manuscripts are warnings, others are records of events erased from public history. There are texts written in tongues that predate any known civilization, as if a single line of thought had persisted, quietly shaping humanity from the shadows. Walking through the archives is like stepping into another dimension, where time itself is pliable. The rows of shelves extend farther than the eye can see, a labyrinth of knowledge that has survived centuries of fire, plunder, and deliberate erasure. Some shelves carry gospels banned for the danger they pose to established authority. Others contain blueprints of machines centuries ahead of their time, astronomical charts that map stars no longer visible, and accounts of civilizations that vanished without a trace. A single scroll might be labeled with a cautious warning, "Do not touch unless approved by the Holy Office," not because the pages are fragile, but because the ideas within could shift everything. Humanity believes about itself. One can almost feel the ghosts of those who once carried these texts in secrecy. Scholars who copied forbidden works by candlelight, priests who risked exile to preserve a single fragment, and archivists who vanished mysteriously, leaving behind only the faint scent of old ink and wax seals. Every object in this vault tells a story of defiance, of memory preserved against the tide of obliteration. The power of these texts is not in gold or jewels, but in what they could unleash. Proof that history has been edited, that knowledge can be weaponized, and that truths long buried may one day resurface to challenge everything we accept as real. Rumors abound of the contents, letters from Leonardo da Vinci describing machines that would not exist for centuries, maps of continents erased from later atlases, gospels that present a Jesus who speaks directly to the individual seeker rather than the masses. Calendars from civilizations that history forgot, warnings inscribed in geometric symbols, codes within the structure of the texts themselves. Every claim is shrouded in secrecy, yet the very persistence of these whispers tells us the archives are alive, as if the knowledge refuses to remain buried. And perhaps the most profound aspect of the vault is its reminder that knowledge itself is dangerous. When ideas are hidden, they gain a kind of power that facts in plain sight cannot match. They become a temptation, a key to worlds the uninitiated cannot yet see. Scholars who glimpse too much may never look at the world the same way again. The hum of the shelves is not just a sound, it is the pulse of memory waiting to awaken, the quiet insistence that history is never fixed, only remembered. The Vatican's secret archives are more than a repository. They are a warning and a promise, a boundary between what humanity knows and what it has been kept from. In those 50 miles of shadowed halls, under the careful watch of unseen guardians, the past waits patiently. And perhaps one day, when the world is ready, or when curiosity can no longer be contained, what has been hidden will rise, not as a relic of fear, but as a beacon of truth. In the depths of the Vatican's secret archives, the air is heavy with the weight of memory. Every shelf, every scroll, every leather-bound codex holds a fragment of history that was almost lost, or perhaps intentionally erased. Among these treasures are documents whose mere existence challenges the very foundation of what we call human knowledge. Scrolls older than civilization itself, banned gospels that rewrite faith, and blueprints of machines centuries ahead of their time. They sit in silence, waiting for the world to catch up, waiting for the right mind to read them without fear. Some of the oldest scrolls predate recorded history, sealed in wax and wrapped in layers of vellum. Scholars who have glimpsed their markings describe strange geometric patterns, symbols that seem to defy language, and faint hints of stories that predate the flood myths of multiple civilizations. They speak of knowledge so ancient it has no origin, as if memory itself had been passed down from an earlier, wiser age. To touch these scrolls is to feel time bending beneath your fingertips. Every line is a bridge between what we know and what has been deliberately hidden. Then there are the banned Gospels, texts removed from the narrative of history because they empowered the individual rather than the institution. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas. Each carries ideas the Church feared would unsettle the faithful. They do not recount miracles or political power, but personal revelations. They speak of the divine within, of a kingdom that exists not in cathedrals, but in the hearts of those willing to see it. To read them is to glimpse an alternate spiritual history, one where knowledge is not handed down by priests, but discovered by the seeker. And then, almost impossibly, there are the blueprints, diagrams of machines and devices centuries ahead of their time sketched, keyed in ink that has survived the passage of ages. Leonardo da Vinci's notes hint at flight, hydraulics, and mechanics, but in some of these forgotten corners of the archives, there are schematics older than his genius, wheels within wheels, gears that could move water across entire cities, systems to harness energy in ways modern science only now begins to understand. Each blueprint is more than a plan. It is a message from minds that knew humanity was capable of more than the world had yet allowed. The suspense of these discoveries lies not only in their content, but in their concealment. Why were these works hidden? Why were the Gospels suppressed, the scrolls sealed, the blueprints locked away? The answer is as simple as it is terrifying. Knowledge is power, and power, when concentrated in the wrong hands, is dangerous. Words, drawings, and symbols, these were seen as weapons. They could rewrite history, challenge authority, and shift belief itself. Archivists speak in hushed tones of the danger of these texts. Even a fleeting glance could change the way one perceives the world. The blueprints could inspire innovations centuries before the world is ready. The Gospels could redefine faith. The ancient scrolls could alter our understanding of civilization itself. To read them is not simply to learn. It is to awaken something long dormant, a memory humanity has nearly forgotten. And yet, there is hope embedded in the very act of preservation. For centuries, guardians, priests, scholars, and even secret societies risked everything to keep these words alive. They understood that truth, once lost, can never be fully restored. But if preserved carefully, it waits patiently, ready to illuminate, to challenge, to remind us that history is not fixed. It is written, yes, but often selectively, edited, shaped by fear and control. The words, the scrolls, the blueprints, they are more than artifacts. They are evidence of a different story, one that refuses to be silenced. And somewhere within those 50 miles of shadowed shelves, among the flickering lamps and sealed doors, that story waits. Waiting for the one who will read, understand, and perhaps finally remember what was never meant to be forgotten. Among the fragile pages of history, few names glow with the quiet brilliance of Leonardo da Vinci. To most, he was a painter, a sculptor, a thinker, a mind centuries ahead of his time. But beneath his artistry lay something deeper, an obsession with knowledge so advanced that even today it feels almost alien. Hidden in his notebooks, thousands of pages written in mirror script, impossible to decipher at first glance, are visions of a world that should not have existed in the 15th century. Machines that fly, engines that breathe, weapons that could reshape empires, designs so far beyond his era that some believed they were never meant to be found. Leonardo did not just dream of flight. He studied it as if he were remembering rather than inventing. He sketched wings modeled after bats and birds, meticulously recording the anatomy of motion, the rhythm of air beneath feathers, the invisible mathematics of the sky. One page shows a man suspended beneath a glider, wings extended, crafted with the precision of modern aeronautics. Another reveals a machine powered by rotating blades, what we now recognize as a helicopter. Yet these were drawn in a world where flight was the language of angels, not men. And still, Leonardo pursued it. He built prototypes from linen and reed, balancing them in secret workshops, testing ideas that would not be realized for centuries. His notes whisper of frustration and awe, of a man torn between the laws of heaven and the curiosity of earth. "Once you have tasted flight," he wrote, "you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward." It was not poetry, it was prophecy. But his notebooks were never meant for the public eye. Many were coded, written backward to protect their secrets from the church, from patrons, and perhaps from humanity itself. For in his time, curiosity had limits. The line between invention and heresy was razor thin. The church watched minds like Leonardo's closely, men who sought to understand rather than merely worship, who dared to see the divine in geometry, anatomy, and motion rather than scripture. Some of his designs, particularly those dealing with flight and energy, were labeled dangerous, hidden away, lost to vaults and archives, that among the sketches were not just machines of wonder, but devices of destruction. Tanks, submarines, and weapons that foreshadowed centuries of warfare to come. Leonardo saw what could be, but he also feared what mankind might do with such power. And so he disguised many of his inventions in allegory and puzzle, embedding warnings within the beauty of his art. To the untrained eye, a painting was a masterpiece. To those who could read his symbols, it was an equation, a design, a memory of something older than recorded time. Some historians whisper that Leonardo was not the first to dream of such machines, that he may have rediscovered a knowledge once known and buried. His notes on fluid dynamics, optics, and mechanical motion echo discoveries made millennia later. Was he perhaps guided by fragments of forgotten wisdom? Or was he one of the rare few who could reach across the veil of time, touching truths humanity was not yet ready to understand? When he died, his notebooks were scattered, some gifted, others stolen, many vanishing into private collections and hidden archives. Even today, hundreds of his pages remain missing. Where they are, no one knows. Perhaps among them lie designs that could still change everything. A perpetual motion machine, a lost key to flight, a blueprint for power drawn in the quiet glow of candlelight. Leonardo da Vinci stands as a reminder that knowledge does not always move forward. Sometimes it circles, disappearing and reappearing across the centuries like a comet. His forbidden designs were not just the product of genius, they were messages to the future, warnings and invitations written in ink that still refuses to fade. And as long as one page remains unread, his voice endures, whispering from the past, asking the question that echoes through every age. What else have we forgotten? There are maps that history cannot explain, maps that should not exist. Etched on animal skin, carved into stone, or drawn with ink that has long since faded, these ancient charts reveal coastlines buried beneath ice, mountains beneath the sea, and stars arranged in patterns unknown to modern astronomy. They are relics of a memory humanity no longer possesses, proof, perhaps, of civilizations that rose and fell before recorded time ever began. One such artifact is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who claimed he compiled it from sources older than the flood. It shows Antarctica, not as an icy wasteland, but as a green, temperate land free of ice. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as fantasy, a sailor's exaggeration. Yet when scientists mapped Antarctica beneath its frozen surface in the 20th century, they found coastlines that matched the ancient chart with uncanny precision. How could a map from the age of exploration depict what lay hidden under miles of ice, thousands of years before satellites or sonar? And the Piri Reis map is not alone. The Orontius Phineus map, drawn in 1531, mirrors the same impossible geography. The Boache map of 1737 shows rivers flowing beneath Antarctic ice sheets that modern research only confirmed centuries later. Each of these maps points to a knowledge of Earth that should have been impossible. Together they whisper of cartographers who did not discover the world, but remembered it. The stars tell a similar story. Some ancient charts, like the Dendera zodiac of Egypt or the Babylonian star maps, record constellations misaligned with the sky we see today. The stars they describe belong to a sky that existed tens of thousands of years ago, as if their creators were mapping the heavens of another age. The tilt of the Earth changes slowly, painfully slowly, over millennia. To draw the stars as they were would require a memory of the sky stretching back far beyond any written civilization. And yet there they are, carved into temple ceilings, painted in colors that still glow under torchlight. Every time historians confront these anomalies, they retreat to the comfort of speculation. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps artistic license. But deep down, there is an unease, a recognition that these maps might be fragments of a world erased not by imagination, but by catastrophe. They speak of continents that sank beneath the waves, coastlines redrawn by cataclysms, and human eyes that once saw the planet as it truly was. For the keepers of official history, such maps are inconvenient. They suggest that civilization is not a straight line, but a cycle, that humanity may have risen and fallen many times, leaving behind traces of knowledge too complex to explain. And so, quietly, these artifacts are stored, dismissed, or forgotten. Museums label them curiosities, and archives bury them under more comfortable narratives. But the maps endure, silent witnesses to a truth too large to ignore. Perhaps they were preserved intentionally, by those who knew that memory is fragile, that truth can drown in time. Or perhaps they survived by accident, fragments that slipped through the cracks of erasure. Either way, their existence demands a question few dare to ask. What if our version of history is only a fraction of the story? When you look at these maps, those faint, meticulous lines, you see more than geography. You see defiance. You see a message sent through the centuries, written not in words but in coastlines and constellations. We were here. We knew. Remember us. The maps that shouldn't be exist precisely because they were never meant to fit. They are the echoes of worlds erased, of knowledge buried, of stars once known to minds we have forgotten. And perhaps, somewhere deep in the archives of time, more returned. Maps wait, unfolded, unseen, ready to remind us that history, like the earth itself, is far older and far stranger than we dare to imagine. Somewhere in the dim silence of an old monastery archive, there lies a scroll no one dares to read twice. It is said to shimmer faintly under candlelight, letters not inked but pressed in gold leaf, their edges alive with patterns that seem to move when the light shifts. It is written in no known alphabet. Its lines flow not from left to right, but in spirals, curves, and interlocking geometries, as though the writer sought to imitate the movements of the cosmos itself. Those who have seen it call it the Scroll of the Golden Tongue, a text that whispers in symbols older than Latin, older perhaps than written language itself. Scholars have tried to decode it for centuries, but every attempt ends the same. Fascination turns to obsession, and obsession to silence. Some claim the symbols change over time, that what was once a circle becomes an eye, that lines rearrange themselves as if reacting to the thoughts of the reader. What could such a thing mean? Imagine for a moment that language was once not spoken but felt. That ancient civilizations understood knowledge not as words on a page, but as living patterns of energy and geometry. To read such a language would not merely convey information, it would alter perception. The scroll in that sense may not be a document at all, but a mirror, one that reflects the consciousness of whoever dares to look upon it. Its surface is delicate yet unaged. The gold leaf, tested and retested, resists all explanation. It does not tarnish even after centuries of air and touch. Microscopic studies reveal that it is not gold as we know it, but an alloy impossible to recreate with modern metallurgy. How did hands of the ancient world craft such a thing, and why? Some believe the scroll came from the ruins of Alexandria before the fires consumed its library. Others say it was found deep beneath Rome, sealed in a vault meant to never be opened. There are even whispers of monastic orders charged with guarding it, their task not to study the words, but to prevent anyone from understanding them, because perhaps understanding is the danger. One account from the 18th century tells of a Jesuit scholar who claimed to have translated a single passage. His notes, now lost, described what he called an equation of existence, a sequence of symbols that mapped not the world, but the very principles by which it was created. Days later, he vanished. Only a single line remained in his journal. It watches back. In every era, there have been languages said to contain power, names of God that could bend reality, runes that summon visions, chants that open the gates of memory. But this scroll is different. It doesn't promise miracles or secrets of alchemy. It promises understanding. And in a universe built on mystery, understanding may be the greatest threat of all. To read the scroll is to cross a threshold, to awaken a part of the human mind long asleep, a part that remembers symbols not as marks, but as living truths. It suggests that knowledge is not discovered but remembered, that language itself was once the key to creation. And so, the scroll rests in the dark, its golden letters glimmering softly, waiting for the next curious soul to look too long. Some say it holds the original language, the first word ever spoken, before time, before separation, when all things were one. Perhaps that is why it cannot be translated. Perhaps it was never meant to be read, only understood. In 1945, near the Egyptian village of Nag Hammadi, a farmer's spade struck something that would unsettle centuries of certainty. Buried in the sand, wrapped in linen and sealed within clay jars, lay a collection of codices, untouched since the dawn of Christianity. Among them, one stood apart, fragile, incomplete, yet defiant against time. It bore a name whispered across generations, the Gospel of Thomas. Unlike the familiar Gospels that echo through churches, this one did not speak of miracles or punishment, of resurrection or prophecy. Instead, it spoke softly, like an ancient voice calling from within. The kingdom of God is inside you and all around you. It was a revelation that shifted everything. If the kingdom was within, what need was there for temples, for priests, for the authority that claimed to guard the way to heaven? The words of Thomas stripped away the hierarchy, declaring that divinity was not something to be granted, but something to be remembered. It offered no threat of damnation, no promise of reward. Only the quiet truth that what humanity sought had always been within. And that, perhaps, was why it had to be erased. The early church, in its struggle to define orthodoxy, faced a dilemma. If each person carried the divine spark, then no institution could claim ownership of salvation. The Gospel of Thomas became a danger, not because it denied God, but because it denied control. By the 4th century, as the New Testament canon solidified, the words of Thomas and dozens of other forbidden texts were declared heresy. They were burned, buried, or rewritten under the weight of doctrine. libraries fell silent. Memory itself was edited, but fragments remained. The surviving sayings of Thomas are unlike anything else in Scripture. They are riddles, metaphors, almost Zen-like in their simplicity. "Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me." In these lines, reality itself becomes sacred. Every act, every breath, becomes a reflection of the divine. Historians argue about its origins. Some call it a Gnostic text, others an echo of a forgotten oral tradition. But beyond labels lies something more profound. A vision of humanity that is not fallen, but asleep. One waiting to awaken. Imagine what it meant centuries ago for someone to read those words in secret, by candlelight behind locked doors. Imagine the risk. To believe that the kingdom was within was to declare freedom from every power built upon fear. It was to remember the first truth that the world forgot, that divinity and humanity are not separate. And so, it was hidden. For nearly 2,000 years, the earth itself kept its silence, guarding the fragile pages beneath layers of sand and time. When the jar finally broke open, it was as though a message had traveled through the ages, waiting for humanity to be ready again. Scholars translated, theologians debated, but for those who truly listened, the message was unmistakable. It was not a gospel of rebellion, but of remembrance. A call not to believe, but to know. "When you come to know yourselves," it says, "then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the sons of the living Father." Perhaps that is why the Gospel of Thomas was never meant to be destroyed, only forgotten, until the world was quiet enough to hear it again. And now, centuries later, its whisper returns. Not to challenge faith, but to remind us that what we seek in heaven has always been waiting within. For nearly 2,000 years, her name has been buried beneath layers of misinterpretation. To the faithful, she became a sinner redeemed. To artists, a figure weeping at the feet of men. Yet hidden in the sands of Egypt, in texts the church tried to forget, another Mary emerges, not fallen, but exalted, not silent, but the one who understood. The Gospel of Mary, discovered in a crumbling codex in the late 19th century, tells a story almost unrecognizable to those raised on the official canon. In it, Mary Magdalene is not a background figure. She is the disciple who sees what others cannot, the one Jesus himself calls blessed above all women. Her gospel begins not with sin, but with revelation. After the death of Christ, the disciples gather, lost and afraid. It is Mary who speaks first, comforting them. She describes visions, teachings, and truths imparted to her alone. Teachings that speak of the soul's journey through realms of consciousness, of liberation not through suffering, but through understanding. And it is here that the story takes its most dangerous turn. For when Peter hears her words, he doubts her. He questions how the Saviour could have spoken privately to a woman and not to them. The room grows tense, but Mary, calm and resolute, replies, "If I am worthy, he made me so." That line, simple, defiant, echoes across centuries. It challenges the foundations of authority itself. What the Gospel of Mary presents is not a woman redeemed, but a teacher silenced, a mind that grasped truths too subtle, too equal for an age that demanded hierarchy. She speaks of the divine not as distant or male, but as light within all things, a harmony between the visible and the unseen. To know God, she taught, was to know oneself, and that perhaps was the greatest threat of all. When her words surfaced, long after the canon was sealed, they revealed what many scholars now call the other Christianity, a path of inner awakening, led not by doctrine, but by direct experience. In this vision, salvation is not granted by the Church, nor earned through penance. It is remembered, like a truth long forgotten. But in the centuries that followed, her image was rewritten, transformed from disciple to penitent, from teacher to symbol of shame. By the 6th century, Pope Gregory the Great declared her a prostitute, blending her story with others to erase her authority. The narrative stuck, and with it, an entire lineage of thought, one that saw the divine in both the feminine and the human, was buried beneath the weight of dogma. Yet history has a way of whispering back. In every era, her image resurfaced, in hidden manuscripts, in art that dared to defy convention, in secret orders that venerated her as the keeper of sacred knowledge. To them, Mary was not a figure of repentance, but remembrance. The one who held the unbroken thread of wisdom passed from master to disciple, not through power, but through insight. Her story is not one of scandal, but suppression, not of sin, but silence. And now, as fragments of her words re-emerge in dusty archives and digital scans, a forgotten truth glows faintly once more, that the voice once cast aside was never truly lost. It only waited for a world ready to listen. Perhaps Mary Magdalene's true legacy was not what she witnessed, but what she understood. That enlightenment was not the privilege of the few, but the birthright of all. And so, across the corridors of time, her voice endures, calm, steady, and unbroken. A whisper reminding humanity that truth cannot be erased, only rewritten until we are ready to remember it again. In the deserts of Egypt, where the wind whispers over broken temples and forgotten graves, a new kind of scripture once slept beneath the sand. It was not written on gilded pages or guarded in marble halls, but sealed in clay, wrapped in linen, and buried by hands that feared what would follow if they were ever found. They were called the Forbidden Gospels, texts that told a different story of the dawn of Christianity. Among them were voices long silenced: Judas, Mary, Philip, Thomas, and others whose names had been erased from the pulpit of memory. Each spoke not of rebellion, but of revelation. Each carried fragments of a truth that the early church could not allow to live. The Gospel of Judas was one of the most shocking. When it surfaced in the 1970s, tattered, half-vanished, but still legible, it told a story that turned the world's oldest betrayal inside out. In this text, Judas is not the traitor. He is the only disciple who truly understands. In its weathered pages, Jesus asks Judas to do what no other could, to free him from the physical body, so his divine essence could return to the stars. Judas hesitates, but obeys. His betrayal becomes an act of obedience, his name a vessel for a misunderstood sacrifice. It was a revelation too strange for comfort. For centuries, the story of Judas had anchored the Church's understanding of sin and redemption. To see him as the chosen one, guided, not damned, was to blur the line between light and shadow, faith and doubt. The Gospel of Judas did not seek to destroy belief, but to deepen it. Yet in a world built on authority, depth was danger. So, like so many others, it vanished, hidden beneath the sands of Egypt, sealed away from both flame and forgiveness. There, in places like Nag Hammadi and Al-Minya, entire libraries of forbidden voices lay sleeping, scrolls that spoke of a divine spark within humanity, of creation as a sowing of balance, of the soul's journey beyond death. These were not the words of heretics, but seekers, scribes who believed that truth could not be owned, only remembered. When the desert finally gave them back, centuries later, their voices felt eerily modern. They spoke of personal revelation over ritual, of understanding over obedience. They offered a Christianity not bound by walls or priesthood, but by experience, a message of liberation that terrified the powers that had spent centuries defining salvation for others. Each fragment that survived, each torn page or faded verse, was a doorway to a world that once existed alongside the one we know, a world of thought, curiosity, and quiet defiance. And yet, there is something deeply human in the fact that they were hidden, not destroyed. It suggests that someone, somewhere, believed these words would matter again one day. That time would turn, and the silence of the buried would once more become a voice. Today, in the quiet hum of climate-controlled archives, those pages are studied under microscopes, translated with care. But even now they seem to carry an unease, an awareness that what they contain still has the power to rearrange faith itself. Because if Judas was not the betrayer, if the divine lives within, if truth was meant to be sought and not given, then the entire narrative of history begins to shift. Perhaps that is why these Gospels were buried, not to hide lies, but to protect truths that the world was not ready to hear. And in the sands of Egypt their whispers remain, waiting for the day humanity dares to listen, not with fear, but with understanding. In the dim glow of a candle, deep within the stone walls of a monastery, a monk bends over a piece of glass. The flickering flame bends through it, splitting light into colors he's never seen before, reds like fire, blues like midnight seas. For a brief moment he forgets where he is, lost in wonder at the way light behaves. But then he remembers. He's not supposed to be doing this. The year is 1278. His name is never recorded. But history remembers the others like him, curious minds who believed that creation was not an enemy to faith, but its reflection. Men who asked questions about the stars, the movement of planets, the nature of sight. To question was to understand, and to understand was to risk everything. Because in an age when knowledge belonged to the church, curiosity was rebellion. The walls of abbeys and cathedrals were not just places of worship, they were fortresses of silence. Libraries chained their books, not to protect them from thieves, but to protect the readers from ideas. Beyond those walls, the Inquisition waited. The wrong question could lead to exile, torture, or death. Imagine it. Centuries before Galileo or Newton, before science was a word spoken freely, a monk holding a polished lens up to sunlight, noticing the curve of the world reflected within. To him, it was divine. To others, it was heresy. History is filled with such quiet rebels. Roger Bacon, imprisoned for suggesting that knowledge should be based on observation, not blind obedience. Giordano Bruno, who dared to say that the stars were suns, each with their own worlds, and was burned alive for it. Even the nameless scribes who copied ancient Greek manuscripts in secret, preserving the works of Aristotle and Archimedes under the noses of those who forbade them. Each one believed the same dangerous thing, that truth was not confined to scripture alone. To experiment was to look directly at creation, and in doing so, to see the face of God more clearly than dogma allowed. But the Church could not permit that. Knowledge was power, and power could not be shared. The scholars became suspects. Their laboratories turned into cells. And yet curiosity persisted. Hidden in monasteries, secret brotherhoods formed. Scholars passed diagrams hand to hand, maps of the stars, anatomical sketches, translations of lost texts. Their tools were simple: candlelight, ink, glass, and faith, not in religion, but in reason. To ask was to rebel. To learn was to survive. In the silence of night, when all the bells had stilled, one could hear the quiet scratching of quills on parchment, the sound of forbidden thought finding its way into history. For these men and women, curiosity was not arrogance, it was devotion. They believed that the universe was a book written by the Creator, and that to read its pages was to honor Him. But the world was not ready for such faith. Those who questioned too boldly were branded heretics, their notes burned, their names erased. Yet their questions survived, passed like seeds through centuries of suppression, waiting for new minds to give them light again. And in that lies the paradox of control. The more tightly truth is held, the more fiercely it seeks escape. Curiosity could be silenced, but never killed. For every monk exiled, another watched in silence, learning. For every book burned, a copy survived, hidden beneath a floorboard or sewn into a robe. And so, across centuries of fear, humanity's oldest instinct endured, the need to know. Because even in the darkest of times, when asking a question meant defying the world, there were always those who looked at the stars and wondered why. And that simple word, why, was the spark that no fire could ever extinguish. There is a moment in every age when truth outpaces permission, when the boundaries drawn by power can no longer contain the human desire to know. The 17th century was such a time. Telescopes turned toward the heavens, scalpels toward the body, and for the first time, humankind began to see itself clearly. And that was the beginning of the problem. In a dim observatory in Padua, Galileo Galilei raised his handmade telescope to the night sky. The lens was crude, its polish uneven. Yet through it, he saw something that would change everything. Moons orbiting Jupiter, stars invisible to the naked eye, and a truth that defied centuries of belief. The earth was not the center of creation. For a moment, he simply watched. The cosmos, vast and indifferent, moved in harmony beyond human law. But the moment he wrote it down, his wonder became heresy. The Church summoned him not for blasphemy, but for being early. To see the world as it truly is was to challenge the world as authority wished it to be. Galileo's discoveries did not just threaten Scripture, they threatened control. If the earth moved around the sun, then heaven itself was not fixed, and divine order could no longer be measured in human hierarchy. He was ordered to recant. Under the watchful eyes of the Inquisition, he whispered the words they demanded. But as legend tells, when the sentence was done, he murmured under his breath, "Eppur si muove." And yet, it moves. The phrase became more than defiance. It became a prophecy. While Galileo stared upward, others looked inward. In candlelit chambers, anatomists cut into the forbidden. Andreas Vesalius, studying bodies in secret, uncovered what medieval scholars had never dared to confirm: that the human body did not conform to the texts of Galen, that life itself was a mystery beyond authority's reach. For this, he was condemned. His curiosity labeled sacrilege. It was only their discoveries that terrified the powerful. It was what those discoveries implied, that truth could exist without permission, that understanding did not need a priest. And so science was chained, not in laboratories, but in minds. Centuries of potential bound by fear. Books locked, ideas destroyed, names erased. Even as humanity brushed against the edge of revelation, it was forced back into obedience. Yet the truth has a way of surviving. Hidden in coded manuscripts, disguised as theology, disguised as art. Leonardo's sketches of flight were drawn in mirror script. Kepler's laws of motion were buried within letters to his patrons. The search for knowledge retreated underground, surviving through whispers, symbols, and faith, not in dogma, but in reason. The irony was painful. Those punished for being wrong could have been forgiven, but those punished for being right too soon could not. History would later celebrate them as heroes, but in their own time they lived as exiles, men who saw too much. Their instruments were confiscated, their books censored, their visions condemned. Yet even under the weight of persecution, they never renounced curiosity itself. And that is what endures. The story of Galileo, Vesalius, Bruno, and countless others is not one of tragedy, but of inevitability. Because no matter how tightly knowledge is bound, it always finds new eyes to see through, new hands to write with, new minds willing to question. Science, when chained, does not die, it dreams. And in those dreams, humanity prepares itself for the next leap, waiting for the moment when the world is finally ready to hear what truth has been trying to say all along. There are moments in history when knowledge itself bleeds. When to hold a book is to hold a weapon, when every page, every inked word becomes an act of rebellion. In the centuries after the fall of Rome, the written world teetered on extinction. Libraries were burned, scrolls erased, and the wisdom of ages labelled heresy. The Church, in its hunger to purify, decreed that certain books, those of reason, of stars, of medicine, were dangerous to the soul. And yet, across dimly lit monasteries and forgotten cellars, a silent resistance began. They were not warriors. They were monks, students, wanderers, guardians of memory. By candlelight, they copied words they were forbidden even to read aloud. Their quills trembled not from age, but from fear. Each stroke was a prayer and a crime. Some transcribed Plato beneath false scripture. Others hid the works of Archimedes within hymns. The language of science and philosophy was reborn in margins and footnotes, disguised beneath devotion. In those hidden rooms, parchment carried the weight of courage. The smell of wax and ink mixed with something darker, the knowledge that discovery meant death. In 13th century Paris, a student named Etienne was caught with a book banned by the Church, an Arabic text on astronomy. His hands, still ink-stained, were broken before the crowd. His punishment was not for heresy, but for daring to think beyond permission. Yet even as the fires burned, others continued the work. In Toledo, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian scholars gathered under the cover of night. They translated Aristotle and Galen from Arabic to Latin, reviving worlds long thought lost. Every page that passed between them was a torch in the darkness, fragile, flickering, but unstoppable. And sometimes their preservation came at a greater cost. In the scriptorium of Monte Cassino, a monk named Matthias kept a secret ledger, a catalogue of banners, works hidden inside a psalter. When the inquisitors came, he swallowed the keys and set fire to his desk, saving what he could not carry. The ashes of his manuscripts, scattered by the wind, later inspired a rebirth of classical learning, centuries later. It is said that some books still bear their blood, ink blurred by the final breath of those who refused to let them die. Through their sacrifice, the ancient world survived in fragments. A single copied line from Euclid, a lost page from Cicero, a hidden treatise by Alhazen on light. Together, these fragments became the foundation upon which the Renaissance was built. Every age believes it can destroy knowledge, but knowledge has always found its messengers, those who understand that truth is not owned, only carried. So they carried it, across deserts and cathedrals, across generations, through fear and fire. Theirs was not the conquest of empires, but the quiet endurance of memory. And as centuries passed, the blood dried, but the pages endured. When you open a book today, you are touching that defiance, the invisible chain of hands that refuse to let ignorance win. Their stories were erased from official history, but the evidence remains, inked in margins, whispered in symbols, hidden in every text that survived the burning. Their rebellion was not in arms or words shouted in defiance. It was in silence, in the steady movement of a quill across forbidden parchment, in the belief that even if the body falls, the idea must live. And so, somewhere beneath the ashes of forgotten monasteries and the ruins of ancient libraries, the truth still breathes, its heartbeat echoing faintly through time. The pulse of humanity's oldest instinct, to remember. They were not kings, nor generals. They held no thrones, commanded no armies, and yet, for nearly 4 centuries, they ruled the world, not through conquest, but through thought. The Jesuits, born from the embers of the Reformation, were architects of a different empire, an empire built not of stone and steel, but of knowledge, persuasion, and silence. Their battleground was the mind, their weapon, education. In the mid-16th century, Europe trembled under the weight of division. The church was splintering. Ideas were spreading faster than control could contain them. Out of this chaos emerged Ignatius of Loyola, a soldier turned mystic who envisioned a new kind of order. The Society of Jesus would not fight the heretics with swords, but with intellect. They would conquer ignorance, one mind at a time. Soon, their schools spread like veins through the heart of Europe. Rome, Paris, Prague, Lisbon, Lima, Beijing. Wherever they went, they built institutions that would shape generations. Princes and paupers alike passed through Jesuit halls, learning the arts, sciences, and philosophy, all taught under the subtle gaze of faith and discipline. But beneath their teachings lay a grander design. Every equation solved, every star chart drawn, every speech crafted, was a thread in a vast web of influence. The Jesuits were scholars, yes, but also diplomats, confessors, and advisors to kings. Behind closed doors, they whispered counsel that could tilt the fate of nations. Monarchs turned to them for guidance, never realizing that in doing so, they ceded something far greater than territory. They surrendered thought itself. Their methods were patient. They understood that the mind is a fortress best taken from within. They didn't suppress questions, they redirected them. They didn't silence curiosity, they steered it toward faith. Their brilliance lay in their restraint, the quiet ability to control the narrative without appearing to do so. Across the oceans, their influence spread like an unseen tide. Jesuit astronomers charted the heavens for emperors of China. Jesuit linguists translated forgotten scripts in the courts of India. Jesuit architects built cathedrals that aligned with the stars. They mapped continents, recorded languages, and drew borders that would shape geopolitics for centuries to come. But power, even silent power, breeds suspicion. By the 18th century, kings and popes alike began to fear the order's reach. The Jesuits had become too effective, too informed, too influential. Their libraries rivaled those of monarchs. Their global network of schools and missions operated with near autonomous precision. To rulers, it seemed as though an invisible hand was guiding policy from the shadows. And so, one by one, the crowns of Europe turned against them, expelled from Portugal, banned from France, erased from Spain. Even the papacy that had once blessed them now cast them out. Their schools were seized, their writings burned, their members scattered. Yet, as history has shown time and again, ideas cannot be exiled. Even in suppression, their work endured. Students they had taught went on to become scientists, explorers, and philosophers, the very architects of the Enlightenment that the Church feared. The Jesuits had planted seeds deeper than any decree could uproot, and when they were restored decades later, they returned not as rebels, but as scholars once more, quiet, observant, unyielding. Their mission had never been conquest. It had always been continuity. Today, their influence still lingers, in universities, in laws, in the way we think about truth itself. They proved that power need not be loud, that revolutions of the mind can be won in whispers. For the Jesuits understood something eternal. Empires fall, armies fade, but the architecture of thought endures, shaped not by those who shout, but by those who listen, and quietly rewrite the world. There was a time when questions were sacred, when to wonder was to worship, and to seek was to see the divine more clearly. But that world faded. Slowly, quietly, a new empire arose. one not built on discovery but on control. It was an empire of silence. In monasteries and cathedrals, the air grew heavy with rules. Obedience became the highest virtue. Imagination, a threat. The mind that reached too far, that dared to dream beyond the written word, was gently corrected or publicly destroyed. Curiosity became heresy, and heresy was death. Scribes no longer wrote to explore but to obey. Each letter, each illuminated margin, was a declaration of loyalty, the spark of inquiry. Once humanity's brightest flame was dimmed beneath layers of doctrine and fear. The Church, shaken by schisms and revolutions, tightened its grasp, weaving control into every syllable of Scripture, every echo of thought. And yet, the spark refused to die. Even as silence fell across Europe, whispers stirred in the margins of forbidden books. In cathedrals, beneath centuries of candle soot, artisans carved symbols no priest could read. Spirals, constellations, and numbers disguised as flowers and leaves. In stained glass, patterns of geometry glowed where saints were supposed to stand. To the faithful, they were decoration. To the initiated, they were language. Some monks, their minds restless, began to hide messages in music, notes arranged to form equations, hymns concealing star maps, chants that mirrored the movement of planets. They sang obedience by day and encoded rebellion by night. The empire of silence had underestimated the human spirit. Because the pursuit of knowledge does not vanish when forbidden, it adapts, it hides, it waits. In underground chambers, in the secret pages of codices, fragments of ancient science endured. The laws of motion, theories of light, diagrams of the heavens, all served under the cover of prayer. A scribe might copy a psalm, then in the space of a single dot, mark a truth for the future. Centuries later, when explorers set sail for new worlds and scholars reopened the works of the ancients, they would find traces of these hidden rebellions, symbols carved into old cathedrals, texts tucked into monastery walls, mathematical precision in architecture long thought divine. They were not accidents, they were messages, left behind by those who refused to forget. The empire of silence, for all its power, could not silence time itself. Because silence, when pressed too tightly, begins to echo, and those echoes guided the thinkers, dreamers, and inventors who would one day reignite humanity's hunger for truth. Galileo's telescope, Da Vinci's sketches, Newton's laws, all of them were built on foundations whispered through centuries of fear. Today, we walk through the remnants of that empire, the churches, the archives, the libraries, and we feel it still, that quiet tension between faith and freedom, between obedience and wonder. And if you listen closely, past the marble and the sermons, you might still hear it, the faint hum of the forbidden spark, still alive beneath the silence. For the empire is gone, but its shadow remains, a reminder that even in the darkest ages, imagination is the one rebellion that cannot be conquered. They rise from the earth like frozen hymns, cathedrals of stone and silence, reaching toward the heavens as if remembering something the world has long since forgotten. To most, they are houses of worship. But to those who look deeper, they are books carved in light, messages written not in words, but in geometry. Every arch, every column, every ray of stained glass was placed with purpose. These ancient builders, masons, mathematicians, mystics, were not merely craftsmen. They were translators of the divine language, encoding truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Step inside Chartres, Notre Dame, or Canterbury, and the air itself hums with hidden order. Sunlight pours through stained glass windows at exact angles, illuminating shapes that repeat in golden proportions. The spiral of the Nautilus, the pattern of galaxies, the very rhythm of the human heartbeat, all reflected in the sacred geometry of their walls. The architects of these cathedrals worked under the watchful eye of the Church, yet their true allegiance lay beyond it, to something older, something cosmic. They believed that creation itself was written in number and form, that to build in harmony with those proportions was to speak the language of God. The golden ratio, 1.618, appears in their designs like a heartbeat beneath stone. It defines the height of the arches, the span of the vaults, the position of the rose windows. The Fibonacci spiral, found in shells, storms, and sunflowers, guides the very flow of the structure's light. And then there are the stars. Some cathedrals align perfectly with constellations visible only during specific celestial events. The floor plan of Chartres mirrors the path of the sun on the summer solstice. Columns at Amiens echo the geometry of Orion's belt. The rose window at Strasbourg frames the rising of Sirius, the star of wisdom in ancient Egypt. Coincidence or memory? Perhaps thus quote. Easy builders were preserving something far older than Christianity itself, a knowledge inherited from civilizations that mapped the heavens long before telescopes were born. Egypt's temples, Greece's sanctuaries, even the Mayan pyramids, all used the same geometry, the same language of stars and symmetry. Across continents and centuries, the code never changed. As empires rose and fell, these patterns endured, hidden in stone when words could no longer be trusted. When curiosity was condemned, geometry became rebellion. When books were burned, light became the messenger. To the untrained eye, the cathedral was devotion. To the few who understood, it was revelation. Imagine a mason working by candlelight, carving a spiral into a pillar, knowing that someday, perhaps centuries later, someone would see it and remember. Imagine a window maker choosing a specific shade of blue because it matched the frequency of the morning star. These were not accidents. They were acts of defiance, acts of faith, in knowledge, in memory, in the eternal dialogue between heaven and earth. Even now, when sunlight passes through those stained glass windows and spills across the floor, the message endures. It is a conversation between stone and light, between the material and the divine. Each cathedral is a map, a reminder that long before science and religion parted ways, both sought the same truth, the pattern that connects all things. And though centuries of silence have tried to bury it, the message still whispers in the geometry of our world, that creation itself is written in light, and the universe has always been speaking. We only had to learn how to see. In a world before microphones and machines, there were those who understood that the universe itself was a symphony. To them, sound was not merely vibration. It was structure. It was language. It was life. And so, they built in resonance. Within the ancient cathedrals and abbeys of Europe, in the temples of Egypt and the stone chambers of the Andes, whispers of a forgotten science still echo, a science that understood sound not as noise, but as power. Step into certain halls, and you can feel it. A single chant, a whisper, lingers longer than it should. The air vibrates, the bones of the building hum, and something deep within the listener shifts. These places were not accidents of acoustics. They were instruments, tuned to the frequencies of the soul. Modern researchers have measured it. In Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, tones resonate at 528 Hz, a frequency now associated with DNA repair and healing. In Gothic cathedrals across France, the arches amplify the harmonic range of the human voice, allowing a single monk's chant to fill the entire nave without echo, as if the sound itself is being carried by the stone. But how could medieval builders, without our technology, know how to tune an entire structure? Perhaps they didn't learn it. Perhaps they remembered it. Throughout ancient history, sacred sites were designed with astonishing acoustic precision. The Hypogeum of Malta, carved thousands of years ago, resonates perfectly at frequencies that induce deep meditation. In Egyptian temples, narrow stone chambers vibrate in harmony with human chanting, producing sensations described as visions of light. Even in South America, the temples of the Incas hum when the wind passes through them, each tone aligned to cardinal directions. Across cultures, across continents, one truth remained. Sound could alter consciousness. To the Church, this was devotion, to be moved by hymns and liturgy. But beneath the prayers, beneath the Latin verses, the geometry of sound carried something deeper. Every arch, every dome, every column was placed to shape resonance, to bend vibration into meaning. Those who designed these sacred spaces may have understood what science would later rediscover, that frequency affects the mind, the heart, and even matter itself. Chanting monks weren't simply praising. They were synchronizing, aligning themselves with vibrations that calmed the body and quieted the mind. The frequencies of these cathedrals often mirror natural patterns: the hum of the earth, the rhythm of the heartbeat, the oscillation of the planets. It is as though the builders were trying to tune humanity back into the universe's original harmony, a reminder that we are instruments too, vibrating in the same cosmic orchestra. Even the stained glass windows play their part. Their intricate geometry bends sunlight into waves of color that align with the harmonic frequencies of sound produced in the halls below. Light and tone, two forms of vibration, united into a single sensory language. Over centuries, the deeper purpose of these designs faded. The music survived, the rituals endured, but the knowledge behind them slipped into legend. Those who once used sound for healing and awakening were forgotten, their teachings sealed behind layers of theology and ritual. Yet the echoes remain. Stand at the heart of an old cathedral when the choir begins to sing, and you will feel it, the invisible thread between sound and being. It moves through the air, through stone, through you. It is knowledge that was never written, because it was never meant to be read. It was meant to be felt, a wisdom of vibration, hidden in plain sight. Because long before we measured the universe in numbers, we heard it. And maybe that is how we first knew it was alive. Beneath the marble floors and golden domes, beneath the solemn prayers that echo through basilicas, lies another world, one without sunlight, without sound, and without names. They called it the Curia, the Secretariat, the sacred congregations, but its true nature was simpler, older, and far more elusive. It was the church beneath the church, a hidden hierarchy that ruled not by decree, but by silence. For most of history, faith was visible. Priests at the altar, popes on the balcony, pilgrims on the road. But power, true power, moved quietly beneath those stones. In the vast labyrinth of the Vatican's underground halls, behind sealed doors and coded archives, decisions were made that shaped empires, crowned kings, and rewrote the very memory of humanity. Here, in chambers lit by oil lamps and guarded by oaths older than nations, men gathered to decide what the world should believe and what it must forget. It was never about corruption in the usual sense. It was about control. The control of story, of thought, of time itself. For every doctrine made public, another was hidden. For every truth spoken from the pulpit, another was locked in vaults beneath Rome. The visible church was the face, the rituals the masses, the scripture. But beneath it, like roots beneath an ancient tree, stretched a network of unseen hands, scholars, archivists, translators, and theologians, each sworn to secrecy, each guarding a fragment of the world's forgotten knowledge. Some whispered of a shadow council, existing beyond papal authority, ensuring continuity even when popes died, or faith wavered. Their task was not faith, It was preservation. To guard the boundaries of belief, to decide which stories humanity was ready for, and which would remain buried beneath centuries of dust. The church beneath the church did not rule through armies, but through memory. It decided which gospels became scripture, which discoveries were declared heresy, which histories would be remembered, and which would be erased. Even now within the archives, spanning miles beneath the Vatican, there are rooms that no pontiff has entered, files that remain sealed for 100 years at a time, documents describing events that should not exist, early maps of the New World before its discovery, treatises on celestial mechanics centuries before Galileo, gospels that rewrite the story of salvation, each one too dangerous to see daylight. And yet, it was not always malice. Some among them believed they were protectors, that truth, too powerful or too disruptive, needed time before the world could face it. Others sought to preserve their own power, believing that mystery was the only way to maintain authority. Whatever their reasons, the result was the same, a curated version of reality, a history rewritten not by victors, but by keepers. As centuries passed, the outer church carried on, priests preaching, bells ringing, candles burning. But the inner church remained, its influence stretching quietly into politics, finance, and global policy. Every shift in doctrine, every silence in history, bore its fingerprint. And today, that shadow still lingers. In the language of papal decrees, in the guarded phrasing of public statements, one can almost sense it. A hesitation, a code, a whisper between lines. Because the church beneath the church never truly disappeared, it simply adapted. It still shapes what we see, what we learn, and what we're allowed to remember. In the end, the greatest secret it ever kept may not be a lost gospel or an ancient relic, but the illusion that the truth was ever meant to be known at all. Beneath the marble corridors of the Vatican, past the archives where history sleeps, there are doors that do not appear on any map, locked, unmarked, and unspoken. They call it the Black Room. Few admit it exists. Fewer still have ever seen it. Yet in whispered accounts passed between archivists and guards, it is described the same way, a chamber buried deep beneath the catacombs, where the air itself feels heavier, older, as though it remembers what the world was never meant to know. Officially, the Vatican secret archives contain more than 50 miles of shelves, letters from emperors, treaties between nations, maps of worlds before ours. But below even that, past the levels where the living seldom walk, lies a section cordoned by stone and shadow. Here, knowledge is not preserved for study. It is contained. No light is allowed inside. Those who enter speak of lamps that flicker and fail, as if the darkness resists illumination. The walls are lined not with books, but with iron chests, sealed in wax, marked with sigils so old they predate Latin. And on those chests, warnings. Not to be opened without pontifical authority. Eyes unworthy will see death. Truth confined for the sake of faith. Legends tell that inside rest, the texts and artifacts deemed too dangerous for even the church to destroy. Scrolls written before the flood, fragments of gospels never meant for human eyes, devices of unknown origin found in the ruins of empires that should not have existed. Some claim the Black Room was created after the fall of Constantinople, when vast troves of ancient manuscripts poured into Rome. Others say it dates back to the Inquisition, when heretical works were confiscated and locked away, not burned. But the oldest rumor of all suggests something darker, that it was built not to store forbidden knowledge, but to hide from it. A former archivist once described it. Anonym, Ousley, in a letter smuggled out of Rome. The air hums. It feels alive. When you stand there, the silence has weight. You sense that what is buried here has not forgotten being buried. Some speak of objects that emit faint sounds, frequencies beyond hearing, of manuscripts written in languages that shift when read, of machines disassembled and sealed away, for fear that rebuilding them would undo the very narrative of time. Even within the Vatican, few are permitted near the lower levels. Security is constant, but subtle. Unmarked guards, rotating schedules, surveillance that records nothing and remembers everything. The closer one gets, the colder the air becomes, as if descending not through space, but through centuries. It is said that popes are briefed on its contents only once, early in their reign. Most choose never to return to that knowledge, because within the black room, truth and heresy blur. History itself becomes unstable. What if the stories we call myths were once memories? What if the relics sealed there prove that humanity is far older than we dare to admit? The Church may have built cathedrals to honor heaven, but beneath them it built vaults to contain Earth's most troubling inheritance. A mirror to faith, one that reflects everything the world was not meant to see. The Black Room is more than a place. It is a boundary, a silent agreement between those who keep secrets and those who prefer not to know. And though its doors remain sealed, its shadow stretches across time, reminding us that for every truth revealed, there are others, deeper still, waiting in the dark. Time, we are told, is the one thing we cannot alter. It flows forward, steady, measurable, absolute. But what if that flow was interrupted? What if entire centuries, people, kings, battles, never happened at all? This is the enigma known as the phantom time hypothesis, a theory that whispers through the cracks of recorded history. It suggests that somewhere between the collapse of Rome and the dawn of the medieval world, hundreds of years were quietly inserted, fabricated, rewritten. The story begins in the 1990s with a German historian named Heribert Illig. While studying medieval calendars, he stumbled upon something impossible. The math didn't add up. According to his calculations, nearly 3 centuries, specifically the years between 614 and 911 AD, appeared suspiciously thin. Few records, sparse evidence, no archaeological strata where they should exist. Illig asked a forbidden question. What if those years were never real? His theory suggested that the early Middle Ages, what we call the Dark Ages, might have been a construction, a historical mirage, that rulers, scribes, and church officials could have adjusted calendars, rewritten chronologies, and invented emperors to fit a prophetic vision of time. And at the center of this alleged illusion, one name, Emperor Otto III. Otto, along with Pope Sylvester II, is said to have conspired to place themselves closer to the year 1000, a sacred number tied to divine prophecy and the anticipated return of Christ. By adding centuries that never were, they aligned their reign with a symbolic millennium, fulfilling a vision of cosmic destiny. But the implications were staggering. If the phantom time hypothesis held any truth, it would mean Charlemagne, the legendary emperor of Europe, might never have existed. The wars, coronations, and manuscripts attributed to that era would be echoes of a time that was written, not lived. Archaeologists began to re-examine their findings. The architecture of the period seemed strangely static. Styles that should have evolved over centuries appeared to leap directly from late Roman to high medieval forms. The written records were few and eerily repetitive, as if copied from older sources. Even astronomical observations, such as eclipses, did not perfectly align with modern calculations unless those phantom centuries were removed. And so a quiet unease spread among historians, because to question the timeline is to question the foundation of civilization itself. Every empire, every religion, every identity depends on when things happened. Shift the calendar, and you shift the meaning of everything we know. Still, many scholars dismissed Illig's claims as speculative, a product of pattern-seeking imagination. Yet, behind closed doors, some admit the evidence of missing time is difficult to ignore. There are gaps in pottery, missing generations in genealogies and chronologies that seem to stretch and compress like manipulated film. Was it deliberate, an act of power, a rewriting of history to control prophecy and memory? Or was it simply human error, miscalculations lost in translation across empires and languages? Either way, the idea lingers like a shadow over our timeline. Because if even one piece of our history was manufactured, then what else might have been? Perhaps we are living in a world built on an illusion of time, a story so carefully constructed that we no longer remember where the truth began. The phantom time hypothesis remains unproven, yet deeply unsettling. It reminds us that history is not a record, it's an agreement, a consensus written by those with the power to decide what the past should be. And somewhere, buried beneath the centuries we take for granted, may lie a question we're not meant to ask. What if the calendar itself is a lie? We live by numbers that feel eternal, days, months, years, a perfect rhythm that governs harvests, prayers, and nations. But time, as we know it, is not a law of nature. It is a decision, a system written, corrected, and rewritten again by those who claim to speak for heaven. The story begins with Julius Caesar. In 46 BCE, he restructured the world's understanding of time. The Julian calendar, he called it, a calendar meant to unify empire and order chaos. It measured the Earth's orbit with precision unheard of in the ancient world, fixing days to the stars. But even then, it was not only science. It was power. To control the calendar was to control taxes, festivals, harvests, people's lives. Caesar became not only emperor of Rome, but emperor of time itself. Yet time has a way of resisting order. Centuries passed. The solar year and the Julian year began to drift, by a fraction each century, a sliver of error that, over time, became undeniable. The equinox moved. Sacred days fell out of alignment, and Easter, the heartbeat of Christian time, was slipping away from the heavens. By the 16th century, the Church faced a problem far greater than math. Its festivals, prophecies, and prayers no longer matched the sky. The world's spiritual rhythm was offbeat, and so, under Pope Gregory XIII, time was rewritten again. In October of 1582, 10 days simply vanished. People went to sleep on October the 4th and awoke on October 15th. History, 10 days of it, was deleted with the stroke of a pen. The new Gregorian calendar promised correction, truth, and divine order. But beneath that promise lay something else, a reshaping of perception itself. Because those who controlled the calendar now controlled how people felt the world turn. Seasons and celebrations, the meaning of prophecy, the anticipation of the year's end, all subtly rewoven. For some, it was liberation from error. For others, it was manipulation disguised as reform. Time, once tied to the movement of the heavens, was now bound to decree. The Church decided when Easter would fall, when the new year would begin, even what century people believed they were living in. And those who resisted, Britain, Russia, parts of the Orthodox East, lived for centuries in a different timeline. Their clocks ticked to older rhythms, their days out of sync with the West. Wars, revolutions, and coronations occurred under skies that disagreed on what year it truly was. Imagine a world where the same sunrise belonged to two different dates, where truth depended on which calendar you obeyed. The calendar became more than a tool, it became a form of memory management. Each reform didn't just adjust time, it rewrote how people understood history itself. What was ancient could become recent. What was prophecy could be declared fulfilled. Because time is not neutral, it shapes belief. Every adjustment shifted emotional weight. The fear of apocalypse, the hope of salvation, the feeling of being near or far from the end of days. When the Church declared the Gregorian calendar to be the true measure of time, it wasn't just correcting errors, it was defining reality. And in doing so, it transformed history from an observation into an experience. From something measured into something felt. So when we look at our watches, our months, our years, what are we really counting? Are we measuring the movement of the earth? Or are we keeping time in a world designed long ago, where power wrote the rhythm of our lives? Because time, in the end, has never been neutral. It has always been a mirror of belief, and perhaps the greatest instrument of control ever devised. There are few weapons more devastating than fire. But the most powerful fire of all is the one that burns in silence, the fire that consumes memory. For thousands of years, empires learned that the surest way to rule the future was to erase the past. They didn't need armies to conquer minds. They needed librarians, censors, and priests with torches. The art of forgetting became a science, a quiet weapon that could shape what humanity believed to be true. It began long before printing presses and parchment. In the sands of Mesopotamia, clay tablets once told stories of floods, stars, and gods who walked among men. But many of those tablets were smashed, deliberately, when new kings rose and older gods were declared false. The victors did not just claim the land, they claimed the timeline itself. In Alexandria, one of the greatest libraries the world had ever known stood as a beacon of all human knowledge. It housed scrolls from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and beyond. Records of medicine, astronomy, and geometry that predated modern science by millennia. And yet, across centuries, it was burned, rebuilt, and burned again, each time by those who feared what it contained. The loss was not accidental, it was strategic. Each destroyed manuscript was a thought removed from the world. Each burned map was a door sealed shut. With every erasure, humanity became easier to steer. When the Church rose to power, a new kind of control emerged, not through conquest, but through curation. Books were translated, rewritten, or corrected. Whole civilizations were recast as pagan, primitive, or non-existent. Ancient maps showing southern lands, Antarctica without ice, forgotten continents across the Atlantic, quietly disappeared from circulation. The age of exploration was built not on discovery, but on selective remembering. To forget became holy. To question became heresy. By the time of the Middle Ages, libraries were guarded as much by doctrine as by stone. Only a handful of scholars could access certain texts, those deemed too dangerous, too heretical, or too strange. Knowledge was locked away, renamed or reinterpreted to fit the story the Church wanted the world to believe. But some resisted. Secret societies, wandering scholars, even monks themselves began to copy forbidden manuscripts by candlelight, hiding fragments in walls, cathedrals, and coded writings. They understood that forgetting wasn't just loss, it was design. Every destroyed text, every redacted line, every vanished artifact was a decision. To decide what humanity should not remember. Because in controlling the boundaries of memory, one controls the imagination, what a civilization thinks is possible, what it fears, and what it dares to dream. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this: forgetting never feels forced. It happens quietly, across generations, until entire truths vanish not in flames, but in indifference. What if the greatest secrets of the world weren't hidden in vaults, but erased from the collective mind? What if every myth, every lost civilization, every forbidden text was part of a memory war we never knew existed? Because to erase knowledge is not to destroy it, it is to bury it beneath the comfort of accepted history. And someday, a fragment resurfaces, a map that doesn't fit the timeline, a manuscript in an unknown script, a story that doesn't match the official version. Each one whispers the same question. What else have we been made to forget? In the end, power does not only come from what we know, it comes from what we are not allowed to remember. And through centuries, that silence has spoken louder than any truth. For every empire that tried to silence the mind, there were always whispers that refused to die. Whispers hidden in stone, woven into art, buried beneath cathedrals, and passed between hands in the dim glow of candlelight. They called it obedience. But beneath obedience, thought still moved, quietly, patiently, like roots beneath frozen ground, waiting for spring. For centuries, the world lived under a kind of spiritual frost, a time when curiosity itself was an act of defiance. The Church had rewritten the boundaries of wonder. Questions about the heavens, the body, or the earth's age were dangerous. To think too far was to risk your life. Yet in cloisters and cellars, men and women still asked them, not with words, but with symbols, equations, and secret maps that only the initiated could understand. Some carved their rebellion into stone, spirals, geometric patterns, or faces that didn't belong to any saint. You can still find them, if you know where to look. A sun with too many rays on the wall of a French abbey, a serpent winding through a chapel ceiling, a set of stars mirrored perfectly to Orion's belt, carved centuries before telescopes made such precision possible. Each symbol was a sentence in a language that could not be spoken aloud. Elsewhere, artists painted halos around philosophers disguised as saints. Alchemists disguised their treatises as prayers. Architects used proportions not to honor scripture, but to echo the mathematics of the universe. In every generation, the same quiet defiance emerged. Those who remembered that knowledge was not blasphemy, but light. They were not rebels in the way history remembers rebellion. There were no banners, no wars, no kings overthrown. Their battle was within the human spirit itself, the right to think, to see, to know. In hidden libraries, beneath monasteries and palaces, secret circles gathered at the temple, asked before their fall, the Rosicrucians, the Hermetic scholars, all fragments of an invisible thread that wound through time. Each held a piece of something older, ancient astronomy, sacred geometry, forgotten medicine, the physics of resonance, the power of sound and light. They believed the universe was a book, and the letters were written not in ink, but in pattern, number, and vibration. To read it was to see the divine. The Church feared this, not because it was false, but because it was too free. Through centuries of fear, these hidden thinkers preserved the fragments that would one day ignite the Renaissance. From the ashes of burned manuscripts came anatomy, perspective, heliocentrism, ideas that would reshape reality itself. Curiosity, it seemed, could not be killed. It only learned to whisper. Even now, the marks of that rebellion remain, etched into architecture, coded into manuscripts, preserved in symbols most walk past without ever noticing. They are reminders that thought, once born, cannot be unmade. Every question is a spark, and though the world tried to drown them, enough sparks survived to light the next age. So when we look upon the cathedrals, the paintings, the scrolls written in riddles, we are not seeing mere relics of faith. We are seeing evidence of resistance, the quiet rebellion of thought that refused to die. Because the greatest revolutions in history are not the ones shouted in the streets. They are the ones whispered in the dark. Across centuries of silence, one truth endured: knowledge can be hidden, but it cannot be destroyed. Every time the torch of understanding was extinguished in the open, another was lit in secret. A quiet flame, passed hand to hand, mind to mind, waiting for those brave enough to remember. Even as inquisitions burned books, even as kings outlawed curiosity, something remarkable was happening beneath the surface. The same knowledge that once filled the scrolls of Alexandria or the stone libraries of Babylon, began to find new forms, disguised, encoded, immortalized in ways no power could erase. Painters turned theology into cipher. Leonardo da Vinci's sketches were not only art, but maps of mechanics and anatomy centuries ahead of their time. Michelangelo carved forbidden geometry into the flesh of angels. In cathedrals, the very architecture spoke in code. The arches echoed equations. The stained glass depicted the rotation of the heavens, and the floor plans aligned with constellations seen only once every 1,000 years. Each building became a book that could not burn. In the age of alchemy, scholars wrote treatises that seemed like riddles: the Emerald Tablet, the Book of the Holy Trinity, the Rosarium Philosophorum. To the untrained eye, they spoke of transmuting metals, but to those who knew how to read them, they revealed something else entirely: a hidden physics of consciousness, a memory of an ancient science lost to dogma. Knowledge became camouflage. Even myths carried the spark. The story of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods was not only about flame, it was a warning and a promise. Fire, in every sense, is knowledge, the light that gives form to shadow. Every civilization that guarded it knew the risk. For once the fire of awareness touches the human mind, it cannot be returned to darkness. Through medieval Europe, through the ruins of Rome, through the silence of the monasteries, fragments of ancient wisdom survived in whispered legends, of Atlantean engineers, Egyptian priests of sound, and builders who raised stones that hummed with energy. And those fragments resurfaced again and again in the minds of inventors, poets, and seekers who never knew they were continuing the same story. It is said that during the darkest centuries, secret societies acted as custodians of that flame. The Freemasons, the Hermetic Order, the Knights Templar, each claimed to guard a piece of the forgotten light. Some hid it in symbols of compass and square, others in rituals that mirrored ancient rites of Egypt and Sumer. They did not protect gold or relics, they protected continuity. Because history, when broken, must be remembered in code. And so the flame burned, quietly, defiantly, through the art, the architecture, the whispered sciences that shaped the Renaissance and beyond. Every age that claimed to end mystery only deepened it. Every attempt to erase truth only scattered it further, into paintings, poems, monuments, constellations. Perhaps the flame was never meant to blaze in the open. Perhaps its power lies in its endurance, surviving through those who dare to seek it. And today, as we rediscover ancient patterns in the stones of forgotten temples, frequencies in sacred spaces, and lost knowledge hidden in plain sight, one thing becomes clear: the flame never went out. It only waited for eyes willing to see it again. Because knowledge, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back to light. For centuries, humanity walked through the ruins of its own forgotten brilliance, stones half buried in dust, languages carved but unread, and echoes of knowledge mistaken for myth. But memory, like light beneath ash, never truly dies. It waits. Across every civilization, there have been those who felt it. A pull, a whisper, an intuition that what we've been told is not all there is. They are the dreamers, the seekers, the quiet rebels who look at the night sky and sense familiarity in the stars. They are the ones who uncover the fragments, a pattern in architecture, a symbol in a forgotten text, an alignment between temples oceans apart, and realize it all points to something older, something enduring. This is the awakening of memory, not of history as we're taught, but of what we have always known. Today, archaeologists, linguists, and scientists stand where alchemists and mystics once stood, at the edge of revelation. Ground-penetrating radar reveals lost cities beneath jungles, Satellites uncover geoglyphs aligned with constellations. Ancient manuscripts once thought heretical are digitized and read again. Every discovery seems to whisper the same idea, that humanity's story is far older, far deeper, and far more interconnected than we ever imagined. The forbidden archives are opening, not through doors of stone, but through technology, curiosity, and courage. What was once sealed by fear is now reclaimed by those who dare to question. It is as if the world itself is remembering. The great cathedrals, once silent monuments of obedience, reveal hidden geometries that speak of resonance and vibration. The myths we dismissed as allegory begin to resemble encoded science. Even ancient ruins, from Egypt to Peru, from Göbekli Tepe to Angkor, seem to share an impossible design, as though built by minds guided by the same cosmic map. And perhaps they were. The Awa. Kenning of memory is not just about unearthing the past, it is about rediscovering who we are, beings of pattern, sound and light, born of curiosity and wonder. The truths once buried beneath dogma are re-emerging in the language of discovery, in art, in science, in the quiet persistence of imagination. Fear tried to bury it. Authority tried to silence it. But truth has a rhythm, and it returns like a heartbeat through time. Now, as the digital age mirrors the libraries of Alexandria reborn, as ancient languages are decoded by algorithms, and long-lost texts are translated by artificial intelligence, the veil between myth and history grows thinner. Each revelation becomes a mirror, reflecting not just what our ancestors knew, but what they remembered from before the forgetting. And with each fragment we recover, a new light flickers to life. In the mind, in the collective soul of humanity. Because perhaps memory was never truly lost. It only slept, waiting for an age brave enough to awaken it. In this great unfolding, we are not just historians. We are participants in the restoration of truth, carriers of the same flame once passed in secret through centuries of silence. And as we remember, we heal the break between what was and what is. The light returns, not as revelation from above, but as recognition from within. This is the awakening of memory, and it has already begun. Across centuries, fire and fear tried to erase the truth, but memory endured. The hidden voices of scholars, the geometry of cathedrals, the coded whispers in ancient texts, all survived, waiting for this moment, for minds ready to see again. Perhaps the greatest secret was never buried in the Vatican, nor locked within any vault, but hidden inside us, in our unending hunger to know, to question, to remember. Every fragment we uncover, every mystery we dare to face, brings us closer to what humanity once was, and what it can still become. The flame of knowledge was never extinguished. It only waited for you. Thank you for watching Mysteries of Earth. If this journey stirred your curiosity, let it continue. Explore, question, and seek the light within forgotten history. Like, share, and subscribe, and join us again as we uncover the next mystery of Earth.